Hey there, my name is Adair. I am a pastor, an organizational consultant, and a leadership coach, and it is my pleasure to bring to you this episode of the Five Factors podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking with Pastor Dan Reiland, the executive pastor of 12 Stone Church outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And we're going to be talking about a couple of things. The main conversation we're going to be having is, as we're releasing this on the day after Easter, we're going to be talking with Dan about some practical things that you can do, regardless of the size of your church, to invite back people who were in your services yesterday on Easter Sunday. Most of us had people in our services that aren't normally there, and so we want to share some very practical, actionable strategies that you can take to welcome back visitors and invite them back into your gatherings this next weekend. I also want to dive into some practical lessons that Dan has learned over more than 35 years of experience about everything from developing emotional intelligence to how he's cultivated friendship, and also talk about some bad pieces of advice that he's heard regarding leadership development. And I also, at the very end, had to dive into a discussion about his incredible guitar collection. So it was a fun conversation with Dan, and looking forward to you hearing about it. One of the things that we're trying to accomplish in this conversation is to help you develop resilience. One of the things that we are absolutely convinced of within this Five Factors leadership framework is that if you invest in your mental health in order to develop wisdom, emotional intelligence, and very sound decision-making skills, you're going to give yourself the best opportunity to keep leading when life knocks you down. And it might be that this is the first time that you've heard an episode of the Five Factors podcast. Maybe you're not really familiar with the Five Factors leadership framework. So Five Factors is an initiative that I started with my friend Tal Prince, who is an associate licensed therapist. So you get two guys that have been pastors, therapists, organizational consultants, and coaches that are helping you build a great church and an even better life. So if you have dreams and ideas about how your life can be different relationally, you want to grow and develop your relationship with family and friends. Physically, maybe you want to get in better shape or sleep better at night. Financially, you know that you have a bucket of money that God has given you, and you want to be smart and generous. You want to be a good steward with the things that God has given you. Spiritually, you want to continue to grow in your life with God, to listen to Him, to trust Him, to obey Him. I want you to go to fivefactors.net/overview, and I want you to download a quick snapshot of the Five Factors system. You go and download that, and you can take a short assessment to see how healthy you actually are. And then you have plenty of opportunities through this podcast, through other things that you'll hear us talk about, to allow us to kind of come alongside of you to help you continue to be the leader you want to be so that you can build a great church and an even better life. That's what we're after, okay? So, with that being said, I'm excited about this conversation with Dan, just an incredibly wise, humble, and needed voice in your life and my life. So here is my conversation with Pastor Dan Reiland. Here with Dan Reiland. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Really, really excited about this conversation, and really thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be here and looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we're releasing this episode the day after Easter, and one of the things that when I was doing some research and been following and learning from you for a while now, but one of the articles that you wrote on your blog that I remember, and we'll link that up in the show notes, but one of the articles I remember, and then doing research, actually the one that has been probably shared the most, is an article that you wrote that's really focusing on 7 reasons why guests return to your church. And so, as people are listening to this the week after Easter, I want to just read through the list and let everybody kind of just sort of have a checklist here of going, okay, how did we do? Okay, so here are the 7 things. You listen to this. Here are the 7 reasons why guests return to your church. Here they are. Let me kind of walk through them. Number 1, the presence of God is felt. And I'm going to just kind of jump in and ask you on a couple of these, Dan. Like on this one, and you're in a Wesleyan church, but you've been working with a lot of churches, a lot of different backgrounds. When you think the presence of God is felt, what are you looking for here? I don't think we're thinking smoke and lights here, because you're thinking a lot of different kind of backgrounds and traditions. So what does that mean?
I think for people, there's something internal. There's something that they, when they walk in, they actually see and sense and feel the presence of God, even if they can't define it.
Yeah.
For example, a pastor or church leaders that might be visiting, they know what that is. They've lived that, they get it, and they walk in, and it's one of the most common things said, wow, we felt the presence of God. But even people who aren't, that's kind of new to them, they're new to the church, they're new to the whole thing, they kind of sense either like an inner peace, or they sense maybe God stirring something or a question or moving within them, but it's clearly something internal that people know, wow, something unique is happening here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously you see that in Corinthians, right? I mean, there's that sense of, people who are coming in from the outside, that they understand something's here. And I think even though, with 12 Stone, I mean, I think there's very much an openness, the church that you're serving, there's an openness to people from the outside, even churches who go, hey, our gatherings are for believers primarily. I think there's still that sense of things that can happen that way. So yeah, I think that first one's important. The presence of God is felt. The second one, key leaders are perceived as trustworthy. So if you have a guest coming in and all they have is that interaction with somebody on a stage for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, so how would they know if a leader is trustworthy?
I think part of that, Matt, it takes a little bit of time, but the flip side is I think people are more intuitive than we give them credit. When they watch a commercial, when they listen to a politician, they get a gut sense if they trust right away. Then I think the practical thing that we do that helps you can't say, there's no such thing as instantaneous trustworthiness. However, I think the more transparent a leader is in their communication, the quicker people can develop a trust. When they see a leader being vulnerable, when they see a leader, when he or she kind of self-discloses and admits faults and they kind of get real kind of fast, that elevates trust really, really quickly.
Yeah. So how would that shape somebody? So again, for an Easter message where the focus is primarily going to be on the resurrection of Christ, I'm not asking you to basically go back and deliver everybody's Easter message for them, but even thinking ahead to the future for maybe some other big day in which people are inviting a lot of outsiders in, how would that shape somebody's message as a preacher, as a communicator?
I think probably most communicators do a pretty good job at this, but telling some of their story,
mm-hmm.
and if not their story, maybe video of other story of life change, so that the people don't hear, this sounds bad, just the message. Obviously that's, the gospel itself is extremely powerful, but we help them connect with what the gospel can do for them, that it's life changing, life altering for a positive good, for a better good, for a better future. And people connect to that.
Yeah.
They connect to that. If you just do, maybe this is a better way to say it, if you just do sort of an academic gospel,
mm-hmm.
It's still true, it's still powerful, but it lacks that connection, that ability for people to say, if God can do that for that guy or that gal, maybe he could do it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in here in Athens, in a university town where if there is a very real necessity at times to present the resurrection from a kind of academic, intellectual, how do we deal with what Tim Keller talks about with defeater beliefs, where people are like, that there's no way that could possibly be true. But at some point in time, if a story doesn't come in, that's actually something on your list of, people are gonna come back if they hear stories of life change. And so I would think that that's a reminder the next big day that somebody has, if you didn't do this on Easter, to make use of the stories that you've been telling to your church. Make sure that people who are coming in for the first time are able to hear that. Is that something that at 12 Stone, is that something that y'all do every week? Is that something that you do consistently? How do you get those stories in front of people?
Very, very consistently. I don't know I can say we do it every week, but almost. And we really actually cultivate through small groups, through the campus pastors. We are actually, one of our primary measurements, I mean, we measure like everybody else. We measure, attendance and all that kind of stuff. But one of our primary measurements is stories. And so we actively, intentionally collect stories, again, through campus pastors, through small groups, we're always gathering. And we get them to our film team. And so many of them either get told by a communicator or get filmed and presented. And we find them the most moving thing ever. I'll tell you something interesting we've just discovered maybe a year or so ago. So the parking lots can get very, very crowded. Mm-hmm. So people, particularly at the central campus, are wanting to dash at the end of the service because they want to beat the crowd. I mean, the parking's intense.
Yeah.
So they want to get out. And so we were having 50, 75, 100, 120, I mean, like a crazy exodus right around the offering. And so we're thinking, And it's not like, okay, stay and give, because that really isn't it, because
Right.
the vast majority of the giving's online.
Right.
It really wasn't about that. But the crucial point of the service is just highly disrupted.
Yeah.
And we made this shift from, rather than every Sunday, if I can use an old-fashioned term, an offertory, the worship band plays during the,
Mm-hmm.
we started putting in more video-driven, visionary story, different things instead of another song. The number of people who left dropped dramatically.
Wow.
Just dramatically. And so that story-based thing, that human touch, that video-driven to our culture, really matters. Really, it's a big deal.
Well, and I think one of the things that if you're thinking about this, and again, one of the things I know about 12 Stone and where their central campus is, it's on a main road and it's right next to a minor league baseball stadium. And so on Sundays, and they have first pitch probably 1:00, somewhere like that. I mean, that whole main kind of thoroughfare can get pretty congested. But even if you're not in a church as large as 12 Stone, I think one of the things for me as I'm hearing this is the first time I've heard you say that, is that it gives you an opportunity to reimagine what you do after the sermon. And even if you don't have people rushing to the exits because your parking lot is crazy, you still have people disengaging. And so how can you tell stories? Maybe instead of like in the middle of your gathering before the sermon, maybe you hold it on the back end because there's a clear call to action of something that you're wanting somebody to take. So another thing on this list is the idea of, I put this down, is that the worship service is awesome. You use a number of different words, but kind of crossing kind of philosophies of ministry and things like that. What are the things that, if guests are coming into a worship gathering, by and large, things that they are looking for that would cause them to go, I think I want to come back here?
Yeah. I don't think it's smoke and mirrors and shooting people out of a cannon. I don't think that's it, lights and all that stuff. I think that's cool. That's fun. We do a good bit of that. But that isn't really it. And some people ask me things like, well, Dan, are choirs in or choirs out? All that kind of stuff. And I say, you know what? Bad choirs are out. Do you know?
Right.
Great choirs are in. It's not what you do, it's how well you do it. And so when churches choose to kind of lift what they can lift and do that really, really well, I think that's what makes the worship service very attractive, very awesome. For example, real practical. If a communicator, if the pastor, maybe his fastball is not preaching, maybe he's a great shepherd, he's a great administrator, he's doing a great job, but he's not a great communicator. Well, there's some simple little tricks like preach shorter. If you're not that good, don't preach long.
Right.
Same with the worship team. Same with, you just lean into what you're good at. Don't try to do what you're not good at. Streamline it down and just do what you do really, really well.
Yeah, I think that's helpful because I do think the temptation on a big day like Easter or some other time of the year is to basically pull out some things that you don't do usually, pull out some people that maybe don't do usually. So this is where when people tell me, hey, we have a choir, but it only does on Easter, I'm like, good luck. I mean, okay. I mean, but they haven't had the experience together. And all of a sudden you're just throwing that group of people on stage. Doesn't mean you can't do anything different. It just means that you have to have some self-awareness to know what works well for you and your church, and to really make that as tight as possible to be able to be as helpful for as many people. They need to get your best that day. And so figuring out what that looks like on this day in which we're, as N.T. Wright says, we're running the flags up the flagpole, and this is the Super Bowl for us, and this is the great day for us in terms of the church calendar. So we're going to link up everything else here. The one thing I want to say is, so Easter was yesterday, or when we're releasing this. So the day went good or bad. What's one thing that a leader can do this week, the week after Easter, to give guests as good of a reason as possible to come back?
Yeah. Well, obviously, Matt, all the things that we're talking about and the things that you'll link up and post, those are the critical things, and that day is past. So what we're talking about now, I want to just say the context again, is what can you do after? It's like a Monday morning kind of a thing. I really think a great extra touch of follow-up is super helpful. And for example, if you're in a small church, a handwritten note to every visitor is really appropriate. A really small church, even attempting to give a phone call. Some people would say that's old-fashioned, but it's really all about scale. If you're in a really large church, it's texts. And obviously you're only doing this to the people that you can get in touch with, the people
Right.
that you know, but that's kind of obvious. You can't follow up anybody that didn't tell you they're there.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really big deal. Some churches get very elaborate and it can get very expensive, and they'll actually mail out something, maybe it was a children's piece or something unique that was attached to a story in the message, and they'll mail out this something to all the guests that identify themselves. But I think it's never too much or overstated to do a personal touch follow-up according to the scale and size of your church that really does make a difference, because that's how you make yourself stand out is different, is who will try to make a personal touch.
Yeah. About a month ago, I read a book that you endorsed by Rich Birch on the Church Growth Flywheel, and I thought he did a really good job with it. A couple of things that I thought were helpful was that the idea is that you're just taking a next step, and over time, if you'll just focus and kind of lower expectations on what the ROI is going to be on what you do today, then that's probably going to help you get where you want to go tomorrow. But one of the questions I had in that was, it seemed like when I was listening to Rich that one of the things that he was almost bringing back into play was direct mail, which I would say over the last 5 years, everybody has kind of said, hey, don't do direct mail. The ROI is terrible. Is that something that y'all have done in the past or are doing now? I want to talk about a couple of ways in which y'all are actually doing that to get the word out about this church.
Yeah, I think if you do it the way it's always been done, I think it's a little outdated, and the ROI is.
Yeah.
So direct mail, just as an unintended kind of a blast out there, just get some zip codes and go. I think you're missing the mark there. But if you'll strategically and intentionally narrow your focus, whether it's new move-ins or a demographic that you're trying to reach, but the more specific targeted, I think that's highly useful. But because social media has so trumped paper, and it's fast and it's cheap and you can hit it and go, I think the paper is good, the mailers are good, but you got to be strategic and intentional and focused, or the big blast just doesn't help you that much. However, I would say there's always a difference between awareness and an invite.
Yeah.
And so if you want to lean into just awareness, like billboards and a good old-fashioned postcard drop, that's good awareness, but never think that's going to be an invite.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel like y'all have done a good job with in terms of awareness is that, all the way here in Athens, I'll see cars that have 12-stone, stickers on the back of their car. And again, it's an investment, guys, not an expense. Everybody, I have this conversation a lot with our listeners where you have to have an investment mindset, not just an expense mindset. So yeah, you're going to spend a little bit of money on things that go on the back of people's cars, but just trying to get brand awareness and then finding ways to do those invites. Do y'all do a lot with Facebook ads?
Yes, we're doing a little bit more and more. What's it called? The
algorithm.
Well, yeah, but there's a certain thing on the word words that are picked up. I'm blanking on what.
Yeah, right. But SEO stuff like that.
We're doing more and more. I think we're getting better at it.
Mm-hmm.
But we're just actually learning more to. What we're actually focusing on, Matt, is learning more how to connect data-driven study to social media. Because what we don't want to do any longer is, or what we have done in the past maybe, is just working really hard on social media, but without measuring it.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of activity. But the team is getting fantastic at measuring the data and figuring out, okay, what is helping, what is working, what blesses the community, what invites people in, what encourages people. How do we become, rather than just Google answering everybody's questions on theology, how can we be helpful in discipleship and theology and answering people's questions and giving them truth, rather than, most people just type Google for anything.
Right.
And yeah.
Has that shaped content a little bit, both for the church and even for you in terms of your blog and everything like that? It's like, so I guess it's a question of how does the church decide what we're talking about? And then even how do you decide what you're talking about on your blog where you're focusing largely on church leaders?
Well, for the blog on church leaders, a lot of it is in response to questions I get.
Mm-hmm.
Pastors will call in often, and so as they're asking me questions, it just sparks ideas. And what's obvious, kind of obvious, is that if one person is asking me, maybe 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 have the same question.
Yeah, you're probably not just meeting the unicorns.
Probably. And so in addition to that, obviously, prayer and things that I'm teaching in different environments and different places that get traction. And then, of course, my own prayer time and things that I think might be helpful to people, my own experience and those kind of things. So it's not an academic, just a topic. It's stuff that I think gets traction.
Yeah.
I mean, in things that are helpful.
And I think the principle, again, to churches is, I think when you're communicating stuff outwardly, so this could be just a blog that a church is creating. This could be a sermon topic that ends up being live streamed or podcast, whatever it is. I think we need to pay attention to the questions that are being asked either within our church or within our community, maybe even both, depending on, what a particular series or message is geared towards or for. So it's kind of like, Easter, which what happens is like, what do we need to be saying about the resurrection of Jesus that connects with the world that we're actually living in? It doesn't change the truth. I mean, again, the faith once for all delivered to the saints, but applied differently. And that distinction is going to be different. The people that y'all have across your campuses in the Atlanta area, even here in Athens, it's going to be a little bit different. So having the wisdom there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to go back into your story. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this is because you have decades of experience. So I want to go all the way back to kind of the beginning. You've been in ministry for more than 35 years. When you were growing up, what did you want to be when you were, 5, 10, 15 years old? What were you dreaming about being when you grew up?
So such a fun question, Matt. Actually, I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that. I wanted to be a veterinarian.
Yeah. Tell me that story. Why?
I think I loved animals. I don't know. It's funny. I mean, we've had dogs. I don't really never had a bunch of animals, but I just thought that was a really cool thing. I liked medicine. I like that whole kind of field. But all the way probably into high school.
Wow.
And that I thought I would be a veterinarian. And until I realized I couldn't stand the sight of blood, particularly.
That's it. It's cut off many a medical and veterinary career.
I think so. It certainly did mine, and I had no idea I would end up as a private investigator after all that. But that seemed to be where I landed after my bachelor's work, and of course God had a much bigger idea after that. But the veterinarian got dumped for a PI.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the story of even going into kind of that kind of work. And how do you connect the dots between something that people have seen on television, and some of us are old enough to remember Magnum PI, but all those kind of things, like how do you end up there?
Well, how I ended up there is my bachelor's degree was in criminal justice administration.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of opportunities there. Pre-law is kind of where a lot of people go. But there's a lot of avenues, from police science to corrections to probation, parole. There's just a lot of kind of work there. And I kind of sampled a lot of it, including the pre-law part. And there was just a lot of things that were a big turnoff. And so I was getting toward the end of my degree. I thought, well, there's nothing left. But I don't. Of course, God was working on me at that time. He was already tapping me on the shoulder for my call to ministry, but I was not really saying yes to that. And so I thought, well, there's kind of one thing left that no one really likes, but I kind of like it, a private investigator. And I actually interviewed for a job and got one, and did that for a year or so. And it was really quite an intriguing experience, because candidly, I would have been a very, very, very naive young preacher kid had I gone straight from that right into ministry, or right from there, right to seminary, right to ministry. And being out there and seeing some real world stuff, for a little over a year, I think was a gift from God.
And was that as much just because you were actually to see depravity in action, or just because you were able to see the way in which just the world works in general?
A little bit of both, because there was business side. The genius of what the people I worked for was most PIs starve. And so, but they had a business model where we did probably half of our work was insurance fraud.
Okay.
Pretty basic, pretty boring, but it kept the business going in a pretty substantial way. And then the other half was all the stuff you see on TV, who's cheating on whose wife and all that kind of stuff. And that was a lot of really kind of ugly stuff and stuff on the other side of humanity, and being exposed to hurting people and things that people would do and things that people would pay for. And of course, by the end of that, Matt, is when God tapped me on the shoulder and said, what you're doing and what you're into and what you're involved with, that's not for you. And I'm gonna put you in a different place, a different seat in life.
Yeah, so you kind of have two trains kind of crossing at this intersection, vocationally and spiritually. So go back a little bit on the spiritual side and talk about how did you become a follower of Jesus and kind of what led into this call to vocational ministry.
Well, I received Christ in 1973 as a graduate from high school, actually, and I went to an outdoor service at Skyline Church.
Yeah.
It was in this football
where you ended up serving with John Maxwell for a number of years.
I did. I went away to seminary and came back as an intern for him many years later. But it was an outdoor service on an Easter Sunday, and I remember seeing the old-fashioned backdrop behind the choir, where the lilies in the blue sky and all that, and it said literally, "He is risen." Yeah. And I sat there in the football bleachers, and I remember hearing this voice. Now you and I know it, was God speaking, was the Holy Spirit, but I didn't know what was going on. I just kind of had this internal quiet thing. It literally said these two words: "It's true."
Wow. And
I didn't hear the message. I didn't get the choir. Nothing really mattered to me. It wasn't no real big deal. But I could not escape the three words written on the backdrop, and they said, "He is risen." And so I just, the lilies in the blue sky, He is risen. I was just sort of locked on that. And that voice came toward the end and said, "It's true." I'm whispering because that's how it sounded to me, but "It's true. It's true. It's true." But I wouldn't go forward. And so the next day in the parking lot, there was this gal I was dating, and I told her, she was the one that kept dragging me to, making me go to all these churchy things if I was going to date her, and I told her what happened. I said, "He is risen." I said, but I didn't say yes. I didn't do what the preacher said. And then I remember asking her, "So do I have to wait till next year to be a Christian?" She said, "No," and we prayed right there in the parking lot, and that changed my life forever. And it was other stories, probably too long for today, that were a rapid ride into leadership. It was a transforming, a marked transformation to a life of church leadership that never stopped.
I'm sure, over 30 plus years of ministry, you've had people who've heard that story and then have seen where you ended up in ministry, but have also, heard the stories about you being a PI and things like that. And in trying to figure out, well, if I'm going to be serious about Jesus, does that mean I need to go into vocational ministry or not? And so how do you help them even answer that question with your story, which the call for ministry to you came later? How do you kind of put those two things together? Somebody who's serious about following Jesus and somebody who is trying to figure out whether or not they should follow a call into vocational ministry. And the reason I'm asking is because we're pastors, right? Well, we get asked this question all the time. So I think you can help us try to figure out how we help other people when they're serious about Jesus and trying to figure out if that means that they need to become a preacher.
Sure. Well, I think the bigger answer is the vast majority of people don't need to be a preacher. I mean, I'm very passionate about young Sharpies being called into ministry. However, we're all called to ministry.
Right.
All called to serve, and God needs sharp men and women out there in all kinds of secular business arena doing all the jobs that are out there. And in many ways, the truth of the matter is, I think they have more freedom to have higher impact with the gospel than we do doing the church thing, because they're out there in the community, and that's really cool and really powerful. I think sometimes they have more freedoms and more abilities and more accessibility than even we do, particularly if you've been a Christian for a long, long time. However, more specifically to your question, there are some who are called. I think when you're to really get a hold of call to ministry, it should never be, well, like I, coming to the end of my degree and I can't figure out anything, like, well, I'll just be a PI. That should never be how you get to ministry.
Right.
Never get to ministry because you weren't doing well in whatever you were doing, or didn't know what you were doing, or you thought, well, that looks like fun, or hey, I can just work one day a week, or all those really dumb kind of things.
Yeah.
I think it has to be almost, you can't do anything else and have a soul peace, an inner peace. You literally can't do anything else. It's such a call. It's such a overwhelming internal voice that this is what God is saying, and you don't have a choice. It is what he is saying. This is what you must do. It is my call on your life. Or I would say, go do something else.
Yeah. So what did that look like for you? You kind of came to that crossroads, and here's your spiritual development, here's your vocational development, and God brings those two things together.
Well, the merger of those two things was kind of interesting, kind of fun, since you're asking. I was a private investigator, but while all my buddies going through college, I never really noticed it till afterwards in reflection, that while all of them, they worked like part-time security jobs or whatever to get through college. They were just kind of in a different realm in criminal justice administration. And all through college, I'm leading a youth group, or I'm in ministry somewhere, or I'm helping out in the church somewhere ever since 1973. I was leading the college group. I would lead some kind of ministry. And so I transitioned from Skyline Wesleyan Church out to Lakeside Wesleyan Church, and I was a private investigator full-time, their associate student pastor part-time.
Okay.
And so I was just doing a lot of stuff. And,
yeah.
And God really got a hold. And I just realized my passion, gifting, calling, every spare moment, every waking moment, every extra thing in me was, I can't wait to get to the church. I can't wait to go do. It was almost the fun part of it. I would just go do my job, but I couldn't go wait to do what became my calling. And so they merged together at that little church out in Lakeside, California, under the leadership of Rich Lobby. And from there, it blossomed into, a lot of other things.
Yeah, it has. You've got this wealth of experience. Working with John Maxwell, somebody well known, both in the church and then in Enjoy, and then coming to 12 Stone. I've never heard the story about you coming to 12 Stone. I'd love to hear that.
Really? Well, you are loving stories.
Hey, it's what makes the world go round.
What makes the world go round? Well, since you're asking, I'd be happy to tell that story. That was a really cool story. So you're asking again from the transition from Enjoy with John Maxwell Company to 12 Stone.
Yep.
It was a time there where really John and I were loving it. The phone was ringing off the hook. It was going extremely well. But I think I'm a pastor at heart, and it kept stirring within me to return to the local church. I worked with churches every day for those 6 or 7 years. I was
right.
Some church somewhere, some conference speaking, writing something, doing something with local churches. But my heart was stirred to go back to one church. And so John and I would walk and talk, and you can't leave me, Dano, and stay with me. And I said, well, I'm never going to leave you, and all that kind of stuff. And because we're good friends, we talk a lot, we text a lot. Just saw him a couple of days ago, and very, very, very close still. And he said, well, okay, you can go, but stay here local in Atlanta, and we'll stay in touch, and we'll do things together. And so we would walk and talk and walk and talk. He did, and he kind of acknowledged, clearly God is calling you back to the local church. And so one night, one of those 2 a.m., 3 a.m. kinds of prayer moments. And I'm not really given to drama kind of a guy, and I probably can only list 4 or 5 of these in my Christian life, but it was one of them. Woke up like at 3 a.m. and I don't want to be weird here, but the room like lit. The power of the Spirit, the wind of the Spirit, it was just so dramatic for me. And it was a very clear voice, and it said, I have to tell you a different part of the story, but it said, you will be an executive pastor. I was telling John, I think it's my time to go be a senior pastor. And my wife and John and others said, Dan, you'd be a really, really good senior pastor. But you will.
Why? What did they see that they felt would make you limited?
The other half, because you might not ask that question. Said you'd be a really good senior pastor, but you were born to be an executive pastor. So that what they were really saying is that's probably not your best choice.
Yeah.
You could do a good job, but this is what you're born to do.
And I think that's important because I think, I mean, I've seen it in work that I've done with church planning networks where you see guys that aren't entrepreneurial, but think that for whatever reason that I mean, that's kind of varsity to go plant churches and even being a senior minister when guys aren't necessarily wired that way. I think that's good insight. Yeah. I mean, in terms of helpful for us, in terms of as we're listening, and some guys that maybe have to be thinking about transitioning or what's next for them. So that's great. Yeah. So sorry, I cut you off there in the middle of the story.
I'll pick it up for a second. But for me, it's always been stewardship, or what I call kingdom math. If I could be a senior pastor of I'll make a 10x church, but God would use me to be an executive pastor in 100x, or 100x and 10,000x. It's just, for me, a stewardship thing. It's just, where can I make the biggest impact? And actually, it ties into another question at some point about self-awareness and who you are and all that kind of stuff, emotional EQ and everything. But anyway, on the story, so God and I were wrestling with this, should I be a senior? I want to be a senior pastor. It's my time. I did the XP tour with John Maxwell. I'm not doing it for anybody else. I am done with that. I'm not doing that again. And we were at North Point Church at that point in time. I was serving on the board and under Andy Stanley. And so, and God said, so the clear message was, you will be an executive pastor. You will be Kevin Meyer's executive pastor. You will move and it won't be convenient. And that was the end of it. It just stopped.
Does that fit very easily into your Wesleyan framework?
I don't know how it fits any kind of framework. It was like, what? So what happens in the light of day, you tell your wife, this weird thing happens, and you think to yourself, right, So I called John. I said, John, because I had met Kevin, but we didn't know each other that well. And I actually came and spoke to his church a couple of times, but it was a good relationship, but I hadn't talked to him in quite a while. And so I called John. I said, John, I don't know, but I think God just told me I'm supposed to be Kevin's executive pastor. And so he hollers at Margaret. He goes, Margaret, Daniel's going to go be Kevin's executive. But no, he goes, I'll call Kevin. And I'm going, no. I'm going, stop. And he just hung up and called Kevin. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I was so embarrassed. I told him, I don't know if he needs an exec pastor, wants an exec. Well, it turns out, John called him. He had to pull his car over off the road. This is all in his journal, because he had been asking for an executive pastor for years. He actually asked me, I wish I could have Reiland, but he'll never leave Maxwell. And so, God, could you give me someone like that guy? And earlier that year, this was summer, and in January of 2001, God told Kevin, stop praying. I have him for you. I have him set aside, and I'll give him to you when it's time. It's all in his journal in January of 2001. And so in summer, that's when John called him and said, Daniel's coming to your church. And it was just such a God-ordained thing. And literally from that moment, I think I was there by October. We went to the board said, well, this is clearly what's meant to be. And I've been here for 17 years come October.
Yeah. It's pretty fun to see. I mean, I've been in Athens since 2004, have made a lot of drives going down 316 and then kind of cutting across going towards the Mall of Georgia. So it's been fun to see Central Campus get developed and formed and following you along. You did mention a couple things that I wanted to touch on, just different areas, I think, of pastoral health and things like that. We talk a lot about emotional intelligence. It certainly has kind of filtered through the marketplace back into the church space. And for you, what are the things that you've had to do, maybe even in the last, 5 years or so, where you've had to pay a little bit more attention either to your own self-awareness or towards developing empathy for others?
Yeah. I don't know if I could package it. I could try, Matt. I don't know if I could package it in just the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Because the story is a longer one. It kind of begins back really early in my development, where I would say I probably wasn't as self-aware. And as a matter of fact, I looked at all the pastors when I came out of seminary, and I saw, well, all the pastors in the big churches, they're choleric sanguines, and if that's who they are, then that's what I'm going to be. I mean,
yeah, explain that, because that's a language that not everybody's familiar with, and it was certainly a very kind of consistent way. Like everybody's talking about the Enneagram now. That was like the Enneagram like 40 years ago, right?
Exactly. And it kind of started them all, and way back in the day. And
yeah,
everything's based on a force, something. You can go take it the right path, take it to wherever you want.
Yeah.
This is where it all started.
Yeah.
The cholerics were the hard charging, the lion. It's all those different variations. The sanguine was the fun person. So the cholerics, the hard charger. The sanguine's the fun person. The melancholy's the thinker type, the more perfection, get it right. And the phlegmatic, that's the easygoing, super good friend type.
They really needed a better marketing plan to put those words out there. It's bad.
Yeah, exactly. So they put the animals to them. Remember down after
yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But those go way back, way back in time.
Right.
Started with four anyway. So what was obvious to me was all the leaders in the big churches. They were the choleric sanguines, the hard charging fun guys. So I thought, I'm going to be a hard charging fun guy, because that's what they are. I'm going to be one of those guys. And I thought, that's intelligent, right? If I want to do that, and that's who they are, that's what I'll do. The problem is, I'm not a choleric sanguine. I'm a choleric melancholy.
Yeah.
And so I thought, and it wasn't until I began to see the difference, notice the difference, and see the dissonance. And then God gave me a great gift. He let me see some pastors in Southern California who weren't choleric sanguines, but they were in huge churches, like Chuck Smith at Calvary.
Yeah.
Huge church, complete phlegmatic. Or a Jack Hayford, huge church, complete melancholy. Brilliant, incredibly gifted guys. He said, "Well, Dan, why don't you just be the person I created you to be and watch what happens?" And it was an extraordinary difference. I love when I'm teaching, telling that story. I'll take longer and unpack it a little bit better than we're chatting here, because I love to help other people sort of give themselves permission to be who God's created them to be. Because prior to that, those first couple of years in ministry, nothing was happening. Very little traction. And it was so much energy, and it was much more energy than output, much more work than return. And when I kind of said, what, I like being me, I like being how God designed me, is when things really began to blossom. And that kind of self-awareness, which is really basically, you would understand this better than most, is when how I see myself matches how others see me.
Yeah.
And that's the struggle people have. And that becoming myself, then the practices that I continue to work on more, current, like you asked a moment ago, is listening, learning to listen, becoming a great question asker. Over the years, I've learned to read the room. I think those kinds of things, learning to listen, asking questions, reading the room, really just being attentive to somebody other than yourself, is what makes it work.
It seems like some of those things go hand in glove, right? I mean, the ability to read a room, some of that is enabled by you having the self-awareness and the self-confidence to know who you are walking into that room. Exactly. So that you're not trying, because it seems like what gets most church leaders over a barrel when it comes to self-awareness is they have that same experience that you had, that I had too, which was, I have to be something in order for people to follow me, in order for people to see me in this role. And if you do have that sense of, this is who I am, I can be myself and walk into a room, then I can read a room, right?
Correct. And it gives you, what it does is it gives you the ability to do or practice what I call relational charisma. Because I think one of the most important principles when you walk in the room is how you walk into the room, what you want to do. For example, I think what relational charisma is when you walk into a room, you're more concerned or you're more attentive to causing the people in the room, helping the people in the room to feel better about who they are, than when you walk in the room and you want to make everybody else feel better about who you are. If you walk in a room unself-aware, or lacking self-awareness, or insecure, or trying to be somebody else, all that stuff, you're so wrapped up in that, you can't even pay attention to what's going on. And so your effort goes into making the people in the room feel better about who you are. And the goal is any room you walk into is to walk in and help the people feel better about who they are. That is relational charisma. That is a way to actually lead and help people follow better.
And that comes back to actually, asking questions, taking an interest in their life, right? It's real simple. I mean, it's a real easy way to, like, people are like, well, how do I grow in emotional intelligence? It's fairly basic in terms of, you can just, here's the hack: walk into a room, find somebody, look them in the eye, have a conversation with them, and you ask all the questions.
That's it. And for the, I coach a lot of young leaders with this. Well, I'm not as good at asking questions as you are, and it is an intuitive art, but there's a two-step process. For the people who that's not intuitive, you can literally, when a coach gets them help, you can literally memorize 5, 7, 8, 9 questions. Just memorize them, and just go down your list and keep asking questions. Now, the better way, of course, where you want to get to, where you want to end up, is you get so intuitive with asking questions that your next question is driven by their previous answer.
Yeah.
That's a more intuitive skill, but you don't have to start there. Even if you're not good at it, you don't have to start there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I say this all the time as we're getting into the podcast. I mean, that's what I'm trying to develop for me, instead of just working off just a blank sheet of questions and just going, hey, we're just going to hit 1 through 10 here, and how do we pivot, in terms of how we go off of it. I was having a conversation with a new coaching client this morning, and he was talking about the challenge that he's having as he gets into his 40s of he's slowing down. And knowing that he has to make some adjustments physically. What are some of the things that you've had to do to just change how you approach your physical health in order to get the most out of your 50s and 60s and beyond?
Well, I have to pivot here on the question, because he went a little bit different direction than I thought you were going. But
just here mixing it up, Dan.
Mixing it up, man. Keeping me on my toes. The change that I've had to do is I've changed my diet quite a bit. I was I don't know if I should say I was addicted to sugar, but man, my wife made me fresh homemade chocolate chip cookies pretty much for 30 years, every night. And
it's a fantastic woman right there, my friend.
Awesome. But between Godiva chocolate and chocolate chip cookies, man, I had pounded sugar for years, and about 2.5 years ago, my doctor said, you're either going to give up the cookies or I'm going to be giving you medicine. And I said, I don't want medicine.
So what was the effect that it was having on you physically?
Just tired, just weight. I was 25, 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And I really haven't changed my diet. I ate pretty healthy. I actually ate pretty good. And a lot of sugar. And I literally cut the sugar out. And it wasn't easy, but it's been 2.5 years now. I have not changed and not gone back. Numbers have changed, health has changed, weight has changed, energy has changed. I have a big battery, but still, you can't eat as much sugar as I did and stay healthy. So that's the change. But I think part of the real answer is, in terms of physical health, is I have been an exerciser kind of forever. And the problem, I've been a jogger, an old SoCal hippie jogger, forever, for 25, 30 years, but probably in the last 10, 15 years, I jog every day. I do a 5K a day. And so it's just kind of a real, I don't go far, don't go fast, I don't look pretty, but it's every day. And so it's not that impressive. I mean, it's 3.1 or whatever it is.
Right.
But here's the thing, it's every day. And so when I encourage guys who ask me about this stuff, I say, don't pick something you're going to do as a fad. Don't pick something you're going to do for a week and a half or a year and a half. So pick something you can do. Pick something you can enjoy. Pick something you can envision yourself doing the rest of your life. That's the thing to pick. Like I don't go to gyms. I'm not going to a gym. If I can't go out my door and do it, because I know me, I don't have enough time. I have X amount of minutes, and so it's got to be super simple, super accessible. I can do it anywhere. Throw on tennis shoes and go.
I think that what I found in interviewing different leaders in my own experience and um, is that I think everybody kind of has this. It's similar to I think nutrition and eating plans. Everybody kind of has one that works for them.
Sure.
I do think it's going to be interesting to me in the next 5, 10, 20 years if we're able to really look at sugar and call it poison. Because of just the long-term effects that it has. I think about this as the parent to 3 boys under the age of 13, and I'm like, oh, fellas, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to start pulling some of this away from you. But I think even in terms of exercise, I mean, you'll have people that will do certain things. We just did an episode recently on the benefits physically of just walking, but whether it's walking, jogging, swimming, it's finding that thing that you can do consistently, and it almost becomes second nature. It just becomes it may be showing up at a gym, it may be hitting the road and jogging, but just showing up and getting things done. So, in terms of as you have gotten older, have you had to have what's kind of the mental game for you? As I'm sure you're not running as fast as you once did, probably having to deal with things are a little bit more sore than they used to be. How do you kind of get through that and just keep on going, knowing that it's just reality? I am where I am in life, but I'm going to keep on going.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've crossed that bridge in terms of speed. I mean, I really am horribly slow, and I don't care. It's not the point. My point is keep going, keep doing it, keep going, keep doing it. And I have kind of markers. I've always said, I used to run. I used to be a runner. Now I'm a jogger, and one day I might be a walker. And you know what? If I have to, when I'm 70 years old or something, if I'm walking 5 miles a day or 3 miles a day, that's okay. But keep moving, keep going, keep pressing. And I still do lightweight training and those kinds of things. So I get the reality of it, and what you're saying is really true. However, Matt, I really don't give into it. I think there's a difference. I think it's a difference between the reality of I don't run as fast and the 20-somethings that, heck, the 20-something moms pushing a baby carriage go faster than I do.
Right.
Yeah. But there's a difference between that and giving into it. So what I mean is, if my knees are sore, my feet are sore, if something's aching, a lot of my contemporaries, they quit. And I just will not quit. I keep going.
Is that because you're stubborn, or is that because you can see here are the real benefits for me?
I'm probably stubborn and stupid. I should stop sometimes, but I know the benefits. And
Yeah.
that's what happens when you quit. And the truth of the matter is, as you age, aches and pains there's nothing you can do about it. And so if you're going to stop because of aches and pains, you're going to stop. And I'm just not going to stop.
You mentioned your friendship with John. In terms of principles, when you look at leaders and you're seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, leaders are lonely. And when you're trying to come alongside of them and go, you need to cultivate friendship. What are some of those things that you're taking from your experience and saying, this is my hope for you, and this is how I would encourage you to cultivate friendships?
Yeah, and I'm very, very blessed in that arena. I've got so many friendships, 25-year, 35-year. John and Margaret, 36 years now, and we text and talk and connect, a lot. And I think the answer is different for everybody in this way. Different personality types connect differently. There are some pastors, some leaders who 2 or 3, 4, 7 close friends. That's really a wonderful, wonderful life. And then there are others, like me on the other side. There's a lot of deep and wonderful and rich relationships. So I don't think that, first of all, I don't think the number matters. But I do think the depth and quality matter. Here's what I do think that matters, is that you're intentional. And that in that intentionality, one of the things I think I've done well and I've been blessed by is I do a lot of initiative. I put a lot of effort and energy in to be the one who will reach out, to be the one who stays connected, to be the one who doesn't do what I hear some of my buddies out there do. As well, they don't call me, or they don't reach out to me, or they don't come to my town. It doesn't bother me. I still keep calling, I still keep writing. And what's happened is that cumulative dividends over the years are extraordinary. When you'll take initiative, I think secondly, genuine and really, really, and I really do. I really care about my friends. And then one last thing I think is I hope this isn't like a patting myself on the back. I hope not, but I really try intentionally to give more than I take.
Yeah.
Really, and I think when you're intentional and you really care and you give more than you take, I think you end up blessed with a lot of friends.
I've heard somebody say, if you're thinking of there's 100% in a relationship, you be the 51 and let them be the 49. And I think that really gets into that principle and even the idea of taking initiative and not waiting on that. And so I think part of the benefit of that is you kind of get to choose a little bit. You get to choose who you want to pursue and which relationships you want to cultivate. But I'm really, really intrigued, concerned in some level of just the number of pastors that I know, church leaders that really are isolated, and just the challenges and the problems that it's created. For you, in terms of, here's one thing maybe to end up on, is when you're looking around kind of the leadership development in churches, is there one particular piece of advice that when you look at what people are passing on to people, you're like, oh, I wish they would stop saying that?
A lot of things come to mind there, but maybe one super quick hitter and then maybe one that takes a minute. I often hear this notion of, because we love pouring into young leaders and residents and interns and that kind of idea. We often hear this, go out there and find your perfect job. Go find your perfect job for this developmental track, and well, I really think that's not good advice. I think go find a healthy environment. Finding a healthy environment is much more important than the perfect job. You'll get your perfect job in time, but if you don't get in a healthy environment, it doesn't matter how perfect that job is. So that's one thing I would say super quick. The other thing I would say that might take a minute and a half here or something is that I watch so many kind of communicating this idea of fast tracking your leadership development, and you just can't.
Yeah.
Leadership development is not a microwave. It's more like a crock pot. It's a simmering process. It takes time. And I get our culture. Everything's, time compression, go, 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 fast, 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 crunch, crunch, crunch. I get it. But you just can't fast track development. Now, you can fast track skills, specific skills for specific tasks. You can fast track a skill, but not that personal, spiritual, the development of who you are, the leadership principles and practices deep in you. That just takes time. And I find that a lot of young leaders who I love working with, they're very impatient. They want to go fast, and you just can't rush it. You can't rush it.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, there's a good element of, hey, I'm ambitious for the glory of God. I want my life to count. I want to make a difference, and I want to get this right. And that's fantastic. And the truth is you will. I mean, I think back in the day, and you could probably think back to, some early teaching moments when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just glad those people are still Christians. Advice you pass on to younger leaders. And I'm like, I kind of hope they weren't listening to me. But over time and cumulatively, as you climb, as you kind of go up this leadership pipeline, it's evolving, it's changing, the world's changing around you, your roles and skills change. And yeah, the guys who are trying to get to the finish line first, the finish line is either when we breathe our last breath or Jesus comes back, whichever happens first. And so, yeah, I'm with you, because it does seem a lot like, I know Daniel M. says this in his book on discipleship, that we have to be careful in churches not to cause people to think that discipleship is a destination. It really is a direction. And what I hear you saying is that's absolutely what leadership development is as well.
It absolutely is. Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to end here when I'm poking around on your website and I see you have this amazing collection of guitars. I need to know more about what really sparked your love for the guitar and which banks you robbed in order to get this just amazingly beautiful collection of guitars.
Well, the banks really are a cumulative effect of, when you collect something for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think I fell in love in the late 60s with the Beatles. And I thought the coolest thing I ever saw in my life around 1967 was an electric guitar.
Yeah.
And my earliest mentor, a cool dude that was several years older than me, just, long-haired guy in the 60s in SoCal playing an electric guitar in a garage band. I thought, if I could do that. And this, I looked at I can't walk it past a guitar today and I'll just stop. I mean, there's something that just grabs me about the beauty of and the intrigue in them. It's just so cool. The guitars are the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And so I began to learn back then, and ended up in a couple of garage bands. I still think maybe I was a lead player in a former life. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe, when I had hair. But it's just been my fun, and I taught my son how to play, and he's actually good. I'm more of a collector.
Yeah, you're back there playing bar chords and rhythm guitar and letting him play lead now.
That's it. So it's fun, and I enjoy it, and I love to watch all the young guys who actually can play, but it's been fun to collect them. And of course, my wife laughs at me because every guitar, she laughs at me because every guitar that I had to have, I just had to have that guitar. She watched me sell it so I can get the next guitar that I just have to have,
So what are you looking at now? What's the next addition to the collection?
Oh, that's a long list, but I've always looked at, I've never added a Rickenbacker to my.
I was going to ask with the Beatles connection. I was like, because I don't see one in your collection right now.
But I keep looking, because they're really hard to find one that plays well or even tunes at all.
Yeah.
They're not the best made guitar, but they're a Ricky. Come on, they're great guitars. You have to have one,
Yeah.
And so I may add one of those at some point. Believe it or not, I'm probably the only guy in the world that doesn't have a Les Paul right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask because it's kind of like a Ford and Chevy thing, Gibson or Les Paul or Fender, but I'm seeing a lot of Fenders in your collection.
You are, but I've had lots of Gibsons. Still have, one great 335.
Yep. Is that the one with the Big B?
No, that one doesn't.
Okay.
Bigsby one is the Gretsch.
Yeah.
And I've got several custom kind of builds too, but I've sold my Les Pauls over time. And so one day you just have to go back and get a Les Paul. But
right.
The guys are just busting my chops all the time because I think I'm the only guy on the planet who doesn't like the gold tops. And so they go, how could you not like a gold top? Because I don't. So I will find a different one when I find one someday.
Yes, and you'll see it and you'll know it and it will be yours.
It will be mine. That's right.
There it is. Well, Dan, I'm really grateful for your time today. I just want to acknowledge you for not only just accumulating experience over 30 plus years of ministry, but sharing it with a lot of people. And, I'm grateful for technology. I'm grateful for the fact that you've been able to put things into blogs and other environments and have been able to help leaders like me and this conversation just continue that legacy. And so I'm really grateful for that. And we're not too far from one another. So sometime I'm coming down, I'm going to buy you lunch and we'll hang out.
I would love that, man. Let's do that.
That'd be fantastic. Well, I appreciate it, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, thanks again to Pastor Dan Reiland for his time today on this episode of the 5 Factors podcast. If you're not following Dan already on Twitter, go ahead and go to Dan Reiland. That is Reiland, Dan Reiland, and follow along with him. If you haven't subscribed to his blog, we'll link that up in the show notes. Also, would encourage you to buy his book, Amplified Leadership. We didn't talk about this in the conversation, but it's an extremely helpful book that I'd encourage you to go ahead and buy. We'll link that up in the show notes as well. And here's the secret that I want you to walk away with. Again, every episode that we do of this podcast, we want to kind of pull back the curtain and make sure that you see clearly something that can sneak by us. It's a secret because we don't always take action on the things that we know. And here's the thing that I would that I'm walking away with from this conversation with Dan, and that is when you think about this week and your follow-up with people, don't fail to take action because you can't do everything that you want to do. So if there are so many ways that you would want to follow up with people who show up in your gatherings on a Sunday, when you're dreaming about everything, don't fail to take action on something. So as you're following up with people on this week after Easter, then find what you can do. Do the thing that's most available to you, that's immediately available to you, that you can take action on, and follow up on the people who have taken their time, their energy, that showed up in your gathering. You have no idea what God is doing in their life and how beneficial and life-changing that point of contact, a handwritten note, a text message, an email, a Facebook message, something that you do to connect with somebody, to say thank you so much for being part of our gathering on this most incredibly important day for us as Christians. We would love to be able to do anything we can to help and serve you. We'd love to have you back next Sunday. So make sure you take action on something, even if you can't do everything that you want. All right. So again, if you're brand new to the 5 Factors podcast, would encourage you to go to 5factors.net/overview. That's going to help you focus on what matters most in leadership, and it's going to help you find out how healthy you are. And again, if you haven't done so already, would encourage you to subscribe to the 5 Factors podcast, and you can do that on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, Spotify. We're pretty much everywhere where podcasts show up, and that way you don't have to remember to come and download an episode. It'll just show up wherever it is that you listen to podcasts week in and week out as we continue this conversation to help you build a great church and an even better life. So on behalf of Pastor Dan Reiland, on behalf of my co-host Hal Prince, who will be back next week, we look forward to seeing you on future episodes of the 5 Factors podcast.